I'm just waiting for a few more people to come in. I think we've got some people still coming into the waiting room. But I will start by saying Happy New Year and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jacqui Fortnum. I'm a senior consultant at the Audience Agency, and for the purposes of the audio description, I'm in my mid-50s and I wear glasses. My pronouns are she, her. I have purplish hair, and today I'm wearing a grey hand-knit jumper. My colleague Megan is also here with me, and she'll be keeping an eye on the chat as we go through the session. In this session, I'll be taking you through the process of creating an audience development plan. The focus will be on taking a structured approach, looking at questions that it may be useful for you to consider as you go through the process, and exploring a range of tools that you might find helpful in developing your plan. It's important to note from the outset that there is no one-size-fits-all plan, but hopefully today's session will equip you with what you need to develop an approach that works for you and your organisation, or to refine an existing one so that it's more effective in delivering what it is that you need. Please feel free to post questions in the chat as we go through, and I'll pick these up at the end, along with any other questions you may have. Megan will also be on hand to answer any questions that need immediate answers. And if we run out of time to cover them all, I'm happy to follow up with any remaining questions outside of the session. We'll be sharing the slide set with you after the session, and in addition to the main concepts that we talk through, there'll also be links to further information and resources that you can use to explore any of the topics that we cover in a bit more detail. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded and that we'll be sending you a link to it afterwards. We have a comfort break built into the session, but if you need to step away at any point, you'll be able to catch up with anything you missed via that recording. So very quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Audience Agency, a very brief introduction. We're a mission-led charity, and our core purpose is to support cultural organisations in building meaningful relationships with their audiences and the communities that they serve. We take a person-centred and data-informed approach to audience development, and it's worth noting that we use both cultural and audience in their widest possible senses, as a shorthand really to cover the broad range of art forms, organisation types and stakeholders that we work with. We work across the UK and internationally with organisations of all sizes and governances and different art forms, and we use our primary audience research and insight tools to inform and advocate for equity and access in cultural provision and policy. And a quick note about my experience with audience development planning. Before I joined TAA, I worked with them as a client. I was the public engagement manager for the John Rylands Library in Manchester. My experience cuts across both sides of this conversation. In my current role as a consultant and in my previous one, where I was responsible for creating audience development plans and delivering them in practice. What do we mean by audience development and what does that involve? From the outset, it's important to note that audience development doesn't exist in a vacuum. Cultural organisations are often in the position of juggling multiple strategic priorities, often reflecting the triple bottom line, which is represented here. Balancing your
Jacqui, sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Your audio is coming in and out a little bit. I don't know if you just did an adjustment on your headset might solve the problem for a couple of people. That's clear already. Thank you.
Great. Sorry about that.
Not at all. No, you're all good. Thanks, Jacqui.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me better now. So often you're in the position of balancing different strategic priorities, your financial obligations, your cultural and artistic ambitions, and a sense of social responsibility towards the communities that you serve. By taking a strategic, people-centred approach to audience development planning, which is essentially about putting your audiences at the heart of what you want to achieve, will help you identify how engagement with different sorts of people can support delivery across all of these priority areas, and also help to break down any potential or perceived conflicts between them. So thinking about that triple bottom line and what it might mean to you. In terms of your financial priorities and business planning, it's about, keeping the doors open and the lights on, people paid. Audiences are an essential part of bringing income into your organisation, most often directly through ticket sales, secondary spend in your shop or cafe, or individual giving or donating, but sometimes also indirectly through audience engagement initiatives that open up access to new funding streams for you. And thinking about your artistic or cultural ambitions, these are often fundamental to your organisational vision and purpose. And ultimately, they're about how you want people to see you and engage with you and think about you, including both your audiences and also how you want to position yourself within the wider sector. Strategic aims you have around service to the neighbourhoods and communities in which you sit will be primarily informed by your overall mission and vision, but may be subject to the influence of funders and other stakeholders, which will be driven in turn by their priorities. So link all of this, audience-centred strategic planning can help you align your organisational goals with those of external stakeholders such as funders and partners, making the process of identifying and cultivating relevant funding and partnership opportunities easier and more effective. That might include, for example, understanding and meeting the needs of your local residents, which is particularly important for organisations working within local authority provision, or perhaps informing the delivery of established charitable responsibilities in the case of organisations that are run or supported by trusts and foundations. Or it could be about delivering on specific engagement outcomes which meet the needs of arts councils or other national funding bodies. So there's quite a lot that comes into this thinking about those different priority areas that you might have. So let's have a more detailed look at what we mean by audience development and what that looks like in practice. There are many different ways to define what audience development is. The audience agency defines it as a planned organisation-wide approach to extending the range and nature of relationships with the public by focusing on their needs. It helps a cultural organisation to achieve its social purpose, financial sustainability and creative ambitions. The National Arts Council and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, along with a lot of other organisations and agencies, have developed their own ways to define audience development. But the thing that all of these definitions have in common is this idea of an organisation-wide approach that puts audiences at the heart of planned decision-making. And thinking about what that looks like in practice, I think at this point it's useful to reflect on the difference between audience development and community engagement. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but it's important to recognise that communities exist regardless of your organisation and what you do. Audience development is a way of thinking about and developing your relationship with those communities. So whilst community engagement might be an important part of your audience development planning, it's likely to be one part of a much broader strategy.
Hi, Jeff. Sorry, I'm jumping in again. Apologies. A few people are still struggling a little bit with audio. I don't know if there's anything else you can do, but just for everyone that's in the room, we do have live captioning enabled, which you can click on in your meeting controls at the bottom of the screen, which is working and does seem to be transcribing what Jacqui's saying quite well. So if that does help people, I would definitely recommend that. This should be in the meeting control bar at the bottom. You should have the option to enable captions. But I don't know if there's anything you can do at all, Jacqui. I know it's a pain, isn't it, with headsets? Sorry.
I only have the one headset and I've got it right next to me. Is that any better?
It's good. It just comes and goes.
Oh, I'm really sorry about that. I've not had that problem before. So
no, not at all. Some people are saying it's fine. Other people are saying problems. So I think it might just be a little bit of Zoom being a bit glitchy as well. So thank you to those who've said they can or can't hear well. It's good to get a sense of what's going on, but we'll keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for those of you who've experienced some difficulties. I will try and speak up perhaps a little bit in case that helps.
And there's a suggestion as well, it's potentially the bandwidth. If you've got any other programs running perhaps on your machine, it might make a difference.
I always close everything down.
Yeah, just one of those things. But thank you everyone for bearing with us. It is captioned. We will be sending out notes in the recording afterwards as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, so essentially it's all about growth, and that can manifest itself in a number of different ways. It could be about increasing ticket sales or footfall. It could be about engaging audiences who are more representative of the populations you serve, or it could be about deepening your relationships with your existing audiences. But essentially it centres on inviting people to do something with you. So we're going to have a think about now about who is it that you want to invite, and why is it important for you. So audience development looks different for different organisations. It could be about, as I say, reaching and building relationships with a broader range of audiences, perhaps focusing on developing your audience to become more representative of the people living in your local area, or on reaching out to people who are marginalised or underserved in your area or art form. Or it could be about deepening relationships with existing attenders, encouraging them to get more involved in what you do, becoming advocates or supporters through membership, volunteering, or individual giving, for example. Or it could be about attracting more of the same sorts of audiences that you already have. This might be about building footfall or raising your profile or awareness of what you do, or perhaps becoming more self-sustaining and financially resilient by increasing your revenue. Your strategic plan is most likely to be a combination of all of those things, mapping out what you will do for different types, mapping out what you will do for different types of audience to achieve a range of different audience goals, linking back to that triple bottom line and your overall purpose as an organisation. But it's absolutely not about trying to do everything for everybody all at once. So it's really important to think about why you want to engage with a particular audience group and to build a shared understanding of why these groups are a priority for your organisation, both internally across all levels in your organisation, but also with other key stakeholders. We'll support a more embedded approach to building sustainable relationships with your audiences, and will also help with prioritising the resources that you need in order to deliver on the strategy, and that includes both time and money. In the context of your strategic decision making, it can be helpful to think about how does engagement with a particular audience group align with your purpose as an organisation, and what are the routes in for that audience? What do you have to offer them which will be attractive? And how will you identify what is relevant and meaningful for them? And finally, how will engagement with them be sustained and embedded? So with all that in mind, where do you start? Sometimes this can be the most daunting element. So the cycle here represents the broad audience development planning process that underpins today's session. Audience development requires an investment of time from your organisation. It's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And the approach you take to it should be adaptable to accommodate your changing needs and the changing needs of your audiences. But just to reiterate, whatever approach you take, the key to success is making sure that it aligns with your organisational values and vision. And it's underpinned by that shared understanding across your teams and stakeholders. In addition, it should be informed by real evidence and include space and time for reflective learning as part of a continual cycle of improvement and development. Starting at the top, identifying your purpose is often the hardest thing to do. Different people within an organisation may have different perspectives depending on their role and their understanding of your organisational priorities. Again, thinking back to that triple bottom line. But it's a crucial step in any strategic development and is the foundation of an effective audience development plan. So it's really worth taking the time to spend some time doing it and also to involve your teams and stakeholders in the process. If you do that, you'll find it much easier to embed audience development activity right across your organisation. And I think it's important to recognise that having a plan can be really empowering. It gives you an objective framework which you can use to question the extent to which something you're being asked to do, or even something you want to do yourself, will contribute to the delivery of your overall purpose. So in addition to strengthening your offer and increasing the likelihood of success, it also allows you to say no in a really transparent and objective way, or to suggest ways in which a proposal might be strengthened by aligning it with your audience goals. It also supports the targeted use of resources, so you're much less likely to use time and money on ad hoc projects which really have no legacy for you in terms of developing your offer or supporting wider engagement. And once you've defined your purpose, it gives you a focus for identifying your audience goals, ones that are meaningful to you as an organisation and reflect your values and support the delivery of your overall vision. I spoke earlier about the importance of bringing the whole organisation on board. And this really is fundamental to ensuring that your audience development plan is fit for purpose and that it considers all areas of audience engagement and experience, including the valuable knowledge of your staff across the organisation, and also that there's a shared commitment to delivery of the plan. So thinking about how you might go about bringing your organisation on board, involvement is really key to this, so getting them involved in the whole process of planning and decision making. So that includes consultation at all stages of the process, from conversations about your purpose as an organisation and identifying your sort of vision and mission for the future, and also setting your audience goals, through to sharing and discussing the findings from a review of what you've achieved. It's important to really listen and take on board what people say. And if you can't take someone's suggestion on board, talk to them about, why that is, what are the reasons, or how they might change what they're suggesting, so that it can be incorporated. And relate the planning process to the everyday work of your teams. Ask them for input, involve them in a proactive way in defining the implications for their work of putting this plan into practice, and also in generating ideas about how their team will be contributing to achieving your organisation's goals. I think it's always important to remember as well that individuals and teams don't experience change in the same way. For some of them, it's more challenging. And the diagram here sets out the variety of people and behaviours you might expect to deal with within any organisation, really, or any sort of group planning. So think about where different teams and individuals in your organisation might sit within this model. How can you use the champions that you have to bring others on board? And think about how to minimise the effect of any saboteurs or critics you might have in your teams. Can you bring them on board through more direct involvement or by framing things in a different way? Perhaps bringing things to life in a way that's easier for them to understand. Building understanding of why their levels of energy and enthusiasm are lower than others, for example. Looking at things from their perspective and involving them in decision making and problem solving can all help you in building a shared vision for the organisation. And a useful tool to consider within your strategic planning in terms of thinking about the whole organisation is RACI, which some of you may already be familiar with. Essentially, it's a framework that can be applied to different elements of your plan to make it really clear who has the responsibility for carrying out different areas, who has the overall authority, who needs to be consulted about changes and developments to ensure that their opinions have been considered, and who needs to be informed of what needs to be done or what will be happening. That's a really useful framework to consider. And having looked at everything that needs to be considered, the question of why a plan is needed might be moot at this point. But given that the planning itself can be challenging and requires some investment in time and potentially other resources, it's worth looking at the benefits of putting one in place. This Terry Pratchett quote, I think, quite neatly sums up the importance of planning for the future, based on a secure foundation, based on your organisation's core purpose, and informed by a clear understanding of where it is you're starting from. So the quote reads, "If you do not know where you come from, then you don't know where you are. And if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, then you're probably going wrong." And that comes from I Shall Wear Midnight by Terry Pratchett, who happens to be one of my favourite writers as well. But I think it's a useful thing to bear in mind. What are the features of effective audience development planning? We often find that activities targeted at specific audiences often occur as part of a funded project or result from the focus of specific teams or areas of programme delivery. But effective audience development planning is an ongoing and inclusive strategy for sustainable change that helps you to move away from focusing on these more one-off projects or campaigns. And it means that if you develop a project or an activity which engages a particular audience that you want to work with, it means that if they come back again at a future date, there'll still be something there for them. They won't find that all of your energies were put into this one-off project to engage them. And it feels more authentic to them as well, that you want to build a relationship with them. It's mission-led, and it helps to balance your priorities in different areas of organisational development. So it supports delivery on your social purpose, your financial sustainability, and any creative or cultural ambitions that you might have. And it's empowering, as I said before, as it allows you to say no when activity doesn't support your mission. We often see that delivery can be fragmented across different teams within an organisation, and a good audience development plan is organisation-wide, so it integrates departments and operations across your organisation, bringing you all together to work and move towards common goals. It's based on evidence, not assumptions, to inform decision-making. And it addresses how to use different strategies to engage different sorts of audience, usually encompassing both existing and new audiences. People are consulted and involved as part of the process, placing audiences and an understanding of their needs at the centre of the process. It helps you to make best use of the often limited resources available to you, target activities at the people you really want to work with. And it's about building long-term, meaningful and mutually beneficial relationships, a continuous process of review, ensuring continuing relevance. It also supports a measured response to the unexpected. And the importance of that last point became very evident when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, when we saw that organisations who already had an understanding of their audiences had a better idea of how to adapt what they did to continue to support and engage them. And they were also able to pivot much more quickly to new delivery strategies. There are lots of different ways to create an audience development plan, but the main thing is to ensure that it works for you and your organisation. So it needs to be a useful, practical tool that helps you with your work. And it needs to include measures which enable you to understand the impact of any changes you put in place and help you to reflect on your process, on your progress. Adjusting things that aren't working quite as well as you want them to, and very importantly, and often overlooked in the busyness of day-to-day delivery, it allows you to take a moment to share and celebrate your successes, which is another part of bringing the whole organisation along with you. The next step in your planning is understanding where you're starting from. And that's going to help inform how you get from there to where you want to be. So this is moving us in the cycle to analysis. Analysis of your current audiences is all about understanding who they are, where do they come from, which parts of your offer do they engage with and how often, and what sort of experience do they have when they're with you. But before you start looking at new research to find out all of those things, it's really worth rooting out any existing information and insights that you already have. You probably know more about your current audiences than you think you do. To do this, it can be useful to undertake a deeper audit to identify all the different pots of information you may have sitting around in different places. Some of it may be partial or fragmented, but it's really worth having a dig around. In addition to more recognised data sources like survey responses or ticketing data, digital analytics and feedback forms and those sorts of things, you may well have other information sitting in evaluation reports, schools booking information, visitor books, gift aid or shop data, and so on. So there's lots of different ways that you may have accumulated audience data that perhaps you've not really considered. And as part of the audit, think about why you've collected these different bits of information, how you've used it, and what it might be useful for, who knows about it, so who has access to it, how has it been shared in the past, and also how reliable you think it is. So is it about a very small group of people but an intense piece of work, or is it much more sort of bigger scale? This also helps you to think about what's missing in terms of what you need to know, and also have a think about how you're going to find that out. How are you going to fill those gaps in your understanding? So that will help inform any new research that you undertake and ensure that it delivers what you need it to, and that you're not duplicating data that you actually already have access to. Using insights from data sources such as an audience survey or ticketing system, if you have one, participation records or digital analytics, all of these can help you to set benchmarks for current engagement across your different activities. And that will feed into how you measure the impact of any new strategies that you put in place. One of the most useful tools as part of that analysis for understanding your current and potential audiences is segmentation. For those of you who haven't worked with segmentation models before, I'm going to offer a very quick introduction here. Essentially, it's a process of grouping people together based on the things they have in common within a particular context. There are lots of segmentation models available and plenty of advice on how to use them. Different systems work in different situations, depending on what you need to know and how you want to use that information. I was delighted recently to discover that role-playing gamers have developed a segmentation system to support character development, which was quite unexpected, but I enjoyed it a lot. And in an audience development context, segmentation can be a powerful and empowering tool. It supports an audience-centered approach to thinking about what you do and how you present it. And it helps you to understand who you want to engage with and why it's important for you to develop those audiences. It helps you to look at what you do from the perspective of those audiences and recognise differences in terms of what they need and want, what they're looking for from engagement with you, and what their needs and expectations are. It helps you to take an informed approach to developing your offer, including your messaging. So it's not just about the programme offer, it's also about how you talk about it. And to make best use of the resources you have to create meaningful and attractive opportunities to engage those priority audiences. And it also helps you to evaluate your success against the audience goals that you've set yourself. So you can use it as a way of monitoring who actually engages with you compared to who you were hoping would do so. And with all of that, which is all really positive and useful, it's important to recognise that any segmentation is a relatively blunt instrument. So it should be seen as one tool in your arsenal to use alongside your existing understanding and any other audience insight sources that you have. We'll take a quick look now at Audience Spectrum, which is the audience agency's segmentation system, and which we've developed with and for the cultural sector specifically. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it divides the whole UK population into 10 core segments and 20 subsegments. And every household in the UK belongs to one of these groups. Oh, sorry, I've skipped ahead. There we go. People belong to a particular segment depending on their relationship with arts and cultural activity. As with any segmentation, it doesn't negate the fact that we are all individuals, but rather it looks at what we have in common in the specific context of arts and cultural engagement. So what we share in terms of the role that arts and culture play in our lives, our preferences and drivers to engage, the opportunities that we have, our needs, the barriers we face, and also different routes to engagement that we have. People can only belong to one segment at any one time, but they can move between the different segments over their lifetime, becoming more or less engaged, for example, depending on their life stage and circumstance. The 10 segments are divided at an upper level into higher, medium, and lower engaged groups. This is largely related to the opportunities and access that they have to cultural activity, and the lower levels of engagement that we see are rarely, if ever, due to a lack of interest. Importantly for me, Audience Spectrum makes no value judgments about the types of cultural activity that people enjoy, and it reflects an understanding that everyone engages to some extent or another. Some have more opportunities and some face more barriers. And for some people, arts and culture is a bigger part of their lives than it is for others. I think it's worth reflecting briefly at this point on the naming of segments, as this is something that often causes some discomfort. It may reinforce the idea that people are being stereotyped. But importantly, for its effectiveness and practical applications, Audience Spectrum is built on big data sets gathered from real people. And these include the Taking Part survey, the population study, which captures the role that culture plays in people's lives and what they like to spend their time doing. It also builds in cultural proximity indices, which look at where people live in relation to cultural offers available to them, to understand the opportunities they may or may not have access to. It brings in demographics from census data, although it's not a demographic segmentation. It does allow us to understand the demographic context of each segment, which may impact on their engagement preferences. So, for example, how old they are, what their household looks like, whether they have children living at home, and so on. And also it includes wider consumer data from Experian, which adds a layer of lifestyle and socioeconomic understanding. And finally, it brings in data from Audience Answers, our data collection platform, which allows us to understand what people are actually doing and supports ongoing testing of the segments to see if they are behaving in the way that we expect them to. So all of that is to say that the names are really just a shorthand way of capturing the key characteristics of each segment within the Audience Spectrum model. And they can be helpful in building a shared language and understanding around the priority audiences for your organisation. In the segmentation build, all of those data sets that I mentioned were analysed and then mapped, so that we have an understanding not only of who the segments are, but where they are. And that's key to understanding how representative your audience is of the people in your catchment area, or of the population as a whole if you have a national reach, perhaps through online and digital engagement opportunities, for example. It also supports a straightforward and low impact approach to data collection, as you only need to collect postcode data to segment your audiences using Audience Spectrum. Although in practice, most organisations will collect other data as well to develop a deeper understanding and identify what it is that they need to know, take a people-centred approach to their development. So we've looked a bit at analysing what your current audiences look like. It's also important to understand other areas of your current provision. So what your service looks like, what your program offer looks like, identifying what you're currently doing for different types of audience, along with looking at what's working well and what doesn't appear to be working so well, where you might need to make some improvements. It's also useful to review your current marketing activities and their effectiveness. So that might include looking at existing channels and messages and where you have access to information through analytics and so on, their reach, their effectiveness, and what sort of return on investment you're getting for those different marketing strategies. And again, where you don't yet have the evidence that you need to fully understand that current situation and assess how effective things are, you can look to set some audience goals that focus on addressing that through establishing some new research or new ways of monitoring what it is that you do. That can be part of your planning as well. So the next step is moving on from where you're starting from to where you want to get to. And I find that SOAR is a really useful tool for this. It takes the more familiar SWOT analysis in a more strategic direction, and it starts to look at the potential impacts of what you want to achieve in the context of your strengths and the opportunities that you have. So it looks internally at your current strengths and what you want to achieve as an organisation, and externally at whether there are any developments in your area or art form sector that offer opportunities for you to help you develop. And also it looks at, if you achieve everything that you'd like to, so if you realise all of those ambitions that you've identified, what does that result in? What does that look like in the wider world outside of your organisation? What are the wider impacts of what you do? And I find this works really well as a team exercise, and you can run it as part of your strategic planning. It works at both team and whole organisation level. And because it starts from thinking really positively about where you are now, and gets you thinking about where you want to get to, what will help you get there, in addition to, you know, what are going to be the impacts of achieving all of that. It's a really great way of bringing the whole organisation on board and really thinking about what it is that you want to do and how different people in your team are going to be able to contribute to that. Another useful analysis tool is population profiling. So when considering who you'd like to engage with and thinking about your priority audiences, again, linking back to your mission and your audience goals, it's really useful to look at who's in your catchment area and where the potential lies for development. There's a wide range of insights available to explore what the population looks like in your catchment. And by comparing this to your current audiences, you can identify where there's scope for development. It can also offer you some direction around those questions of broader, deeper, or more, thinking back to those different ways that you might grow your audience. So there are sources such as local authority population data, and those can be really useful. And if you're in an area with significant tourism, then there are agencies that can often provide you with insights about who's visiting your area, where there are local and regional development priorities, what those look like, and also changing tourism trends. So if, you know, particularly again, post-pandemic, we saw quite a lot of change in how people visit different areas of the country. The Office for National Statistics, the ONS, their website offers free access to a lot of population census data. It can be really time-consuming to navigate around the website, but there's a huge amount of information there that you will find really useful. Another free resource is our new interactive online mapping tool, which you can find from the Audience Answers link that's on this slide. And you don't need to be logged into Audience Answers platform to access it. You can use it to view the distribution of audience spectrum segments in the population. It gives a great visual view of the dominant segments in each area at a national level, which you can see here. But you can also zoom in on individual postal areas for a more household level breakdown. And that includes the subsegments as well. And you can look at the distribution of specific segments in particular areas to see how many people belonging to the segment live in your area of interest. Again, including the breakdown for the audience spectrum subsegments. So the example here is looking at the distribution of kaleidoscope creativity households in Cardiff. So you can zoom in on quite a lot of detail there. If you're time poor, but you have a bit of budget available, our population profile reports offer a bespoke analysis of a catchment area, which you can define based on the area that's of most interest to you. And you can also have the reporting at a level of detail that you need. So the standard reports include essential census data metrics, population and households, plus audience spectrum and mosaic segmentation profile. But they can be supplemented with other data to give you a more granular review if that's what you need. So the audience spectrum sub-segment profiles, more extensive demographics, a view of leisure activities and sports participation. And you can also have the information presented at ward level. So there's lots of ways to configure the reporting so that it meets your needs. And you can find out more about that on our website following the link on this slide. So all of these tools can be really helpful in identifying where there is potential for you to build new audiences. So it's worth having a dig around to see what's going to be most useful for you. To enhance your understanding of these potential growth areas, there's also a range of benchmarking data which you can access free online via our audience answers and also our audience agency website. And these can add national, art form and regional contexts to your own findings, so the things that you've been able to identify in your own data. One example is our Cultural Participation Monitor, or CPM. And this is a population survey that delivers insight into what people do, what they want, and what they feel about creative and cultural activity, and most importantly, how that is changing. So the CPM started as an Arts and Humanities Research Council partnership programme in response to the growing uncertainty about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on cultural engagement and behaviours. So it's been running in waves since the autumn of 2020. And during that prolonged and ongoing period of uncertainty, the evidence the evidence generated by the CPM proved to be invaluable in helping organisations understand how audiences were changing. And it supported them in making informed, audience-centred responses to those changes. So because it proved to be so useful, we kept the research running. And in each wave, we ask the nations of the UK, So in each wave, the survey goes out to the nations of the UK, and we ask people what they think about current and ongoing issues, things like the cost of living crisis, working from home, the impact that that's had, how they feel about climate change, and how organisations should be responding to it. So we ask them questions about that and the impacts that these different things have on their creative and cultural life. The key findings from each wave are published on our website, along with resource links and case studies to support practical applications of the data. We also run regular free online sessions called tea breaks, tea being talking evidence and audiences, which explore particular topics emerging from the research. And you can also commission bespoke analysis of particular data sets within the CPM. The charts here on this slide are examples drawn from wave 9 of our research, which were conducted in the summer of 2023. These show changes in attendance levels compared to Wave 8, conducted in February 2023. And so that's one you can see there. So you can see the change, it's going up slightly, and we've seen that as an ongoing pattern. So although attendance levels haven't returned to what they looked like pre-pandemic, they have been on a steady increase. And then you can also look at a more granular view, which in this case shows that young people in particular are attending more since February 2023. So like this can help inform your approach to changing behaviours and how you can adjust your programme and marketing to reflect those changing needs and preferences of your priority audience groups. And this will support you in continuing to be relevant and resilient to this change. And you can find out a lot more information and a lot more insights that have emerged from the CPM using the links on this slide. So I've mentioned being people-centred or audience-centred quite a bit so far. And I'd like to move on now to focus on what that actually means. So what does taking a people-centred approach to audience development really look like? Put simply, people-centred thinking in audience development is an approach based on a deep, empathetic understanding of the people you want to engage with, accompanied by a willingness to test and adapt your offer and what you do to meet their needs. It's grounded in the belief that the people facing challenges to engagement are the ones who hold the key to solving those challenges and overcoming them. It brings in a full consideration of what engagement with you looks and feels like as a single journey with your organisation, from the point of discovery through the experience that people might have and into what happens afterwards. And all of this from the perspective of the people that you want to engage with. So it considers the impacts of the different areas of delivery involved, which are often fragmented across an organisation. So that could include marketing, programme or visit offer development, the welcome, your facilities and building management, conservation, all sorts of different things. But it looks at them in a holistic whole organisation way, rather than the more perhaps fragmented, siloed view that often persists internally within organisations, which is something that your audiences don't see. They just have a single viewpoint of your organisation. So this is what a people-centred approach looks at. It also considers what you can uniquely offer and what it is about you that audiences will find relevant and engaging. In this way, the approach is consultative and iterative. So rather than leaping straight to solutions in the way of, we want to engage younger audiences, let's do this thing that we think they'll like, it makes space for trying things out. It allows for constructive failure, so things you can learn from. And it helps you to understand why something has or hasn't worked and how you can apply that learning to future projects. It may seem obvious, but how you talk about and present your offer and what you do can make a huge difference to who's likely to engage with you. And a good example of how that works in practice is considering the features or the facts about your offer compared to the benefits and the reasons why people might want to engage with you. In some cases, and for some audience groups, these might look quite similar, but for others it's really different. So, for example, some audiences might find the features of an 18th century house and garden really engaging. So that might also be the benefit for them. If that means something to them, and perhaps they have an existing interest in history or period architecture, for example. For others, the benefit of visiting might be that the site offers a relaxing space to escape from everyday life. So really thinking about how what you say about your offer potentially lands with the audience that you're aiming at is really important. And a people-centred approach looks at what you offer from that audience perspective. and considers what will be meaningful and engaging for them. So that's something to do. It's sort of a way of looking at everything that you put out. Who is this going to land with? What does this mean to them? As a way of continuing that people-centered approach. So, as I mentioned at the start of this session, audience development in practice really means inviting people to do something with you. And in thinking about the people you need to reach to achieve your goals, it's really good to question if you truly understand how they see your organisation, to understand what they want and what they might need from you, and how you need to invite them. So what sort of language you might need to use. And also think about what you might need to change or adapt in order to reach them, and engage them with what you do. A useful exercise that you can do quite easily to put you in the mindset of your audiences is to take a walk in their shoes. So if you have a physical site or venue, this might be about taking a journey through it as if you were visiting for the first time, and really take note of what it feels like to be in the space. Does it feel welcoming? Is it clear where you need to go? Is it clear what might be expected of people in that space? And you can do the same with digital content. So is it easy to navigate? Can you find what you're looking for? And so on. And this is particularly useful because when you're on the inside, particularly if you've worked in a space or with a particular organisation for a long time, it's really easy to forget how hard it can be for people who are less familiar, and perhaps coming to you for the first time. And if you use that sort of approach in primary research as a methodology, experience or visitor journey mapping can be really powerful in helping you to understand engagement with your offer from the audience perspective. So journey mapping takes in the whole experience from end to end, including digital as well as physical experiences, to present evidence of how each element of that journey contributes to the audience experience of engagement with you overall. And the resulting journey map presents a visualization of the crucial touch points in the audience journey, which are often called moments of truth, and gives you an indication of how each of those touch points influence the overall visit satisfaction levels. So you can make sure that everything that you do is contributing to an excellent visitor experience. And as part of going through this process, you might need to be prepared to make some significant changes in order to engage some of those target audience groups that you have. That could involve taking on board a more design thinking approach, reflecting back to the slide I showed earlier, starting with insight and consultation to find out about your audience needs, and perhaps involving design or co-design of new offers to meet those needs. Could include testing things out in small pilots, and also revising what you do based on the feedback that you get. So that's quite a lot that I've said with you already. So I think now is a good time to take a comfort break. So we'll take a 5-minute break now. If we can come back together at about 2:30, that would be great. And then we'll look at more about what this means in practice for you. Start getting into the nitty-gritty of delivering on your plan. and welcome back. So we'll now move on to the next phase in your audience development cycle, which is about developing your engagement strategies. Strategies are the approaches that you'll take to meet your audience goals and to reach your target audiences. And in particular, your strategic planning should deliver a breakdown of targeted approaches for different audiences and specific goals. It should consider a way to account for any inconsistencies between your artistic ambitions and the potential to engage potential audiences. An example of this might be considering how contemporary work might be presented to audiences whose preferences for more traditional art forms, for example. And it should also cover approaches to developing the whole experience, so including both ongoing and temporary programming, in addition to your communications and marketing. And in devising your strategies, it's useful to think about how you can maximise the potential of your offer to deliver for different audiences, the benefits of engaging from the audience perspective, and also your legacy planning, so how you're going to sustain audience growth, and perhaps use the outcomes of what you've done to inform advocacy. And there are lots of tools available to help you identify your strategic approaches and to break down your planning into more manageable chunks. And one that we've found to be particularly effective, which you may or may not have come across before, is the Ansoff matrix. So the Ansoff matrix was originally devised in 1957 by Igor Ansoff, and it was devised as a strategic business development tool. It can be a really useful way to start breaking down and mapping out your complex audience development strategies into what you will do and who you're doing it for. It includes 4 main approaches based on the combination of new and existing audiences and new and existing offers. I'm not from a marketing background, and I found the original terminology a bit challenging. So I've included here the alternatives that I use in case those might be helpful. It's also worth noting that there are areas of crossover, so activities that might work across different segments. Each one doesn't operate in an entirely separate way. So market penetration, or where the love is, looks at further expansion of current audiences using your current offer. It's all about what you know works well and is enjoyed by the audiences you already engage with. And approaches here might include developing loyalty through membership schemes, developing people into volunteering, increasing secondary spend, or encouraging more frequent visits. It might also be about increasing footfall and income through reaching more of the same sorts of audience that you already have by promoting your offer in areas where those audiences are concentrated. The next quadrant is market development, or making friends. And this is all about presenting your current offer in a way that will attract new types of audience. So the approach here is focused on engaging more and different people with the work that you already do, so your existing offer. So this might be about reaching out to new geographical areas, presenting the offer in a way that appeals to a different type of attender, developing your welcome, or different messaging and using different marketing channels. There is a crossover here with the where the love is quadrant in terms of increasing attendance numbers by reaching out to new audiences who might be similar to those that you already engage. Offer development, or deepening relationships, is about creating new products for current audiences. And the approach here centres on encouraging the people who already engage with you to do more and different things. So that might include incentives to encourage people to try a new type of show, or current visitors, people who are currently visiting one site, if you operate on a number of different sites, to actually visit some of the other things that you have on offer. It might be about programming new and extended events like talks or tours, or perhaps online events. All all designed for your existing audience, but encouraging them to engage in different ways with you. And again, there's some crossover here with the love quadrant. So encouraging people to become members and get more involved with your organisation in different ways might also be part of that deepening relationships. And the last zone is the diversification, or the experimental zone. And this is all about the unknowns. So the development of new offers for new audiences. And it's therefore it's both the riskiest area and the one that tends to involve the use of more resources. But it can also be where particularly rewarding development work happens. And approaches here may be through funded projects, again identified in line with your strategic goals. And they can offer an opportunity for applying design thinking to developing a whole new strand of offer, something that's perhaps co-created or co-curated, or newly commissioned work, or a new area of collecting for you. So there's lots of opportunity in that area, but as I say, it can be quite resource heavy. So some examples of how that has been used in practice. So in terms of market penetration, the theatre Einjog, apologies for my Welsh pronunciation. So for them, their objective was through engagement with their existing audiences, through implementing a targeted evidence-led approach to their communication strategy, so replacing what had been more of a one-size-fits-all approach. The theatre invested in audience spectrum licensing within their TicketSolve booking system, and they identified patterns in audience trends for their main audience spectrum groups through a combination of ticketing system reporting and free audience agency data tools. And using those insights, they created a bespoke season launch for each of their 4 main audience spectrum groups, which highlighted the events which were most likely to appeal to them. And they used evidence of the preferred tone and contextual information in the communications for each of those segment groups. So a much more targeted approach, rather than sending out to the whole mailing list a single message. In terms of market development, Barnsley Museums maximised the appeal of the existing outdoor spaces to attract new and higher numbers of visitors. And this was actually part of their pivoting to different types of activity during the pandemic, where the outdoor spaces became much more valuable than they had been previously. But this has continued into their current delivery as well. So it's been a longer lasting change that was prompted by changes in behaviour during the pandemic, but has led to them making better use of perhaps an underused resource previously. Offer development, the example here is the National Archives, who were interested in how they could engage existing audience groups through their exhibitions. So it was about their people who were visiting them to make use of the research collections, actually getting them to do more things and get involved in the public programme that the National Archives run. So they used focus group research to look into the needs of 2 existing audience groups in their bespoke segmentation model. And the research explored the development of new offers in the exhibition programme to specifically appeal to each of those 2 groups. And they've used that approach to develop a number of different exhibitions which focus on the things which their target audience groups are particularly interested in. And finally, diversification. The example here is Music in the Round, who wanted to reach younger and more ethnically diverse audiences than they currently engage with, and create an audience for contemporary music in Sheffield. So they developed a programme called Sounds of Now, which is a new contemporary music series which features new music from a wider and more diverse range of composers and performers than they previously hosted. and it includes concerts in a wider range of venues and different types of concert experience, such as more intimate experiences and the use of quirky venues that might not be expected to have music events. And that is beginning to show success in attracting those younger and more diverse audiences that they were aiming at. And Sounds of Now has now been developed as an ongoing programme strand at a range of different Sheffield venues, but also touring in the region as well. So you can see how the model can be applied to developing different areas of your offer. And thinking about your online engagement strategies should go hand in hand with developing your in-person planning. How to balance the two is something that many organisations have struggled with for a long time, but it's been brought to the fore in the last few years as a result of the changes we've seen in the way people engage with culture following the pandemic. An empathy map is a useful tool to consider how your target audiences behave, both physically and digitally. So thinking about the whole experience. And the critical point here is to work back from your audience goals, see where your delivery, content and communications enable you to meet that audience. So it's about what is useful and engaging to them rather than just doing digital because you feel that you should do. And it's important to test your digital content by constantly evaluating and testing with real users. And that obviously that applies to your in-person engagement as well. But it may be a particular consideration for digital content because you may be doing a lot of new things and also things change so quickly in the digital realm. So it's important to keep abreast of any changes. And it's also important to recognise that there are very distinct differences in the way different types of audience engage with digital content. So for some, it's purely transactional, while others are content creators themselves, and they're looking for a more participatory experience. Some audiences enjoy the freedom of engaging with online content, which they can consume at their own convenience. And that can be things that perhaps replicate the in-person experience, such as online talks or tours, while others are looking for more born digital work, which exploits the unique characteristics of digital as a medium. Lots of different considerations there. And this empathy mapping approach can be really helpful to decide where the interests of your target audiences lay. So moving on from strategic planning into the more practical actions as part of your audience development plan, we will start with setting objectives. So objectives define what success is for you, what it looks like, and how you can measure it. And there are debates around the relevance of SMART objectives, but it can be a really useful framework, especially if you're quite new to the process of setting objectives, as it clearly sets out all the elements that you should consider. As we become more experienced, it may be less useful and more restrictive, but it's a really good starting point. And it may be useful at this point to note the difference between aims and objectives. They're often used interchangeably in everyday language, but in strategic planning, they have very distinct roles. So aims are the big picture things that you want to achieve as an organisation. They're directly linked to your mission and purpose, and they don't describe how you're actually going to achieve them, how you're going to get there. You're unlikely to have more than, say, 6 or 10 of them at any one time, because they really are big, ambitious things that you want to achieve. Objectives set out how you're going to achieve those aims. So they're more practical. They set out exactly what you're going to do and when. And it's likely that you'll have quite a lot of them because each of your aims often needs multiple objectives linked to it in order to achieve it in the end. As with your strategy planning, your digital objectives could be considered as part of your overall planning. Again, there are some specific points that it may be helpful for you to consider. So social media and website analytics can give you a lot of information. Often it's too much. There's a lot that perhaps you won't be able to use. So it's really important to concentrate on the data which is going to help you answer the questions that you have. And benchmarking, again, is key to understanding what's working for you and what isn't working. And an important part of setting digital benchmarks is identifying what success looks like for your organisation. There's so much variety and variation in what you can deliver digitally. It's most useful to use internal benchmarks, especially at the beginning, rather than compare your outputs with other organisations, because they can be, tailored exactly to what your organisation wants to deliver. So benchmarks might be things like a target amount of people attending a live streamed talk or performance. It might be about having enough people clicking on a link in posts that you send out in mailing lists, which lead through to buying a ticket. Is it about building a community that talks to you through social media? So building up those relationships online. And when you're setting digital engagement objectives, think about if and how you're going to be able to measure what you've achieved, and how you will act on the results to make any changes that might be necessary. So as with your other objectives, some might be internal as well as audience facing. For example, you may need to invest time and other resource in making sure your analytics are set up so that they capture the data that you need. And making your decisions based on these analytics is an iterative process. So it's important, again, to regularly review what's working and interrogate what isn't working and how you can make changes. And you might need to adapt your objectives accordingly as you go through. So really, that's in consideration of the fact that change happens fast in the digital realm. So it's important to keep on top of that change and ensure that what you're delivering remains relevant and interesting for your audiences. So the next step is action planning. This is really getting into the nitty-gritty of who is delivering what and when, what are the resources that you're going to need, and where the responsibilities lie for different elements of delivering your plan. Engagement mix is a useful concept for approaching your action planning. It brings together the traditional P's of marketing practice, product, price, promotion, and place, with the C's of audience-centered engagement, which focus on involving people in decision-making, in exploring different ideas, dialogue, and creating things in different ways. So the marketing mix, or the 4 P's of marketing, represent the main elements in meeting people's needs to engage them with what you do. These are the main factors that will influence people's decision-making and their ability to engage with your organisation. So your product or programme should consider the whole offer and, critically, be really clear about what aspects of your programme are aimed at different target audiences. So place is literally where activities take place, at what times, and how people access them. It can include both physical and digital, and it should also cover practical aspects such as booking facilities, your staff and the welcome, and other aspects such as the environment that things take place in, and what sort of social space there is around them. Price is all about the right price and pricing approach, whether that is an actual cost, whether it's free, to meet the needs of your target audiences. And that applies to all areas. So again, thinking about that whole journey, not just the cost of tickets, but also catering, shop facilities, car parking, all of those things that people will need to consider as part of their decision making to attend. And we know from our research that audiences consider value before cost. So the cost isn't necessarily a barrier in itself if people recognise the value of attending, which again reflects back on thinking about the benefits of attendance for your target groups. And consideration should be given to that value proposition when you're developing your pricing strategy. Promotion involves your online and offline channels and all the different methods you use to communicate the opportunities that people have to engage. And within all of that, think about what evidence you need to inform your understanding across those 4 Ps. And that evidence might come from consultation or research. It could be from external population data, or the audience spectrum profiling that we looked at. So all those different data sources that you used to inform your planning also need to apply to your action planning as well, so that you can understand exactly how you're going to measure your success. The 3 Cs of audience-centered engagement are focused more on building those meaningful and sustainable interactions with your audiences and establishing two-way communications, nurturing those relationships. It's all about involving the community, so perhaps setting up forums for decision-making or volunteering. The content element is about finding creative or exploratory content with and for the people that you want to engage. And co-creation involves active participation by your audiences in that process of developing and devising, creating and curating your offer. So think about how you're already involving people in those different activities and what you might need to do to encourage more people to take part or to develop more opportunities for them to get involved. And in terms of your action planning, again, there's lots of different ways you can do it. The important thing is that it's planned in a way that is useful for you. This example here is just one approach to setting out the action plan. You can include as much or as little information as you need, but just make sure that it is actually helpful for you in keeping track of your progress. That brings us on to the last element in the cycle, which is looking at review and reflection as part of that ongoing planning. And I think it's important to say that the this process of reviewing and reflecting is really vital to ensuring that your plan remains relevant and useful. So the needs of your audiences and your organisation are subject to change, as we've seen already. And so your audience development plan also needs to be reviewed regularly, and if needed, it should be adapted to meet those changing needs. Following the pandemic and its continuing impacts, along with the cost of living crisis, we're all horribly aware of the need to be adaptive to change, both in the short and the long term. On a more positive note, this part of the process is also a really great way of building in celebration of success into your planning and into the delivery of your plan. I'd like to finish with a consideration of what it means to future-proof your audience development plan and a way of building a learning by doing approach into developing your offer, both of which are linked to that principle of ongoing review and reflection and testing to ensure that your plan remains meaningful and effective. As I've mentioned previously, I don't think any of us could have imagined the shocks and stresses of the last few years. But being aware, being aware of the possibility of unexpected change has perhaps never felt so important. And although future-proofing is a substantial topic in its own right, I think it's important to signpost it here as something for you to consider in the process of developing your strategy. The key words in the definition here are design and change. And these encompass that idea of building flexibility, agility, and review into your planning. And just as a last sort of model that you might find useful, this concept of double loop learning might also be useful to consider in the context of how you develop your plan. It's a form of reflective thinking, and it supports informed audience development through that process of pilot testing new activities for priority groups, asking the audience what worked well for them and where they see things might be improved and changed, and then using those results to inform a better understanding both of what the audiences that you want to engage with actually need, what they're looking for, but also how you can adapt your program and your offer to meet those needs. It's particularly effective for challenging assumptions and breaking out of the, well, we tried that and it didn't work, or the we've always done it this way sort of mindsets that tend to build up within organizations over time. And instead, it presents a sort of more open, ready for change response in response to the needs of your audiences. Organisations can get stuck in repeated attempts at making the same approaches work without really questioning if they're the right approaches and without questioning the goals that have been set. And that's single loop learning. So an example might be a theatre continuing to try and sell tickets for a type of show that traditionally sold well, but has seen a decline in sales over the past few years. So the emphasis there might be on trying to boost sales, but without any consideration or understanding of why it's no longer successful. Double loop learning includes the views and experience of participants in that learning cycle. So theories about what they might want to do are made explicit, and then they're tested out. And it's all open for exploration by the people that you want to engage. And an example of double loop learning in practice is Peterborough Presents, which is a creative people and places project that we've evaluated over a number of years. And to begin with, the project looked like it was really successful. Lots of people were attending events and it was getting really high ratings. But when we explored the data more closely, it showed that the programme wasn't actually attracting the low culturally engaged communities that the CPPs are designed to engage. So they turned things around, and whilst the overall CPP and Peterborough Presents aims remained the same, they changed their strategy quite significantly. So they started setting hyperlocal work directly in the communities that they wanted to engage, and also developed a community commissioning scheme that went beyond the sort of big showcase events. And you can read more about that project. It's a really interesting project, and particularly in the way that they changed what they did. You can read more about it on the website following the link on that slide.